Good evening, everyone. Welcome, thank you for being here. I'm Martha Bryant, I'm the Development Director with the Health Collaborative. For some of you who know the Health Collaborative, I think you're looking a little old. That's because Elizabeth Lutz, our Executive Director, had emergency surgery over the weekend, and normally she would be here. The Health Collaborative is a group of local hospitals, healthcare providers, San Antonio Metropolitan Health District, the city and the county, and a bunch of nonprofit organizations that all work together to address health concerns in our community. One of our most important activities is the creation of a community health assessment. Through this study, we pinpoint the most significant health needs in San Antonio. And one of those is always mental health and well-being. That's in part why we're partnering tonight with the 1 in 5 Minds campaign sponsored by Clarity Guidance Center. All of us want to raise awareness of children's mental illness and to fight the stigma right here in our community. You can find lots of information on the Clarity website at www.1in5minds.org. Tonight you'll also be hearing from many of our other partners and individuals who care about mental health in our community. I am pleased to recognize Laurel Ridge Treatment Center, who generously sponsored the dinner you're enjoying. Also a big thank you to Worldwide Languages for translating today's messages for our Spanish speakers, and to NISD for letting us use this great facility. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items. The bathrooms are through this glass wall and across the little opening in the floor. Again, I can't do this in Spanish, but if you need translation services, you can get those in the back corner. We'll be awarding door prizes at the end of the evening, and if you did fill out a slip when you came in, please do so at the break. We'll also have school supplies for kids at the end of the evening. I want to thank the sponsors and exhibitors who ring this room. And if you have time, stop by and see them during the breaks. They have a ton of great information. I wanted to remind you of why we're here tonight. To engage, to learn, and to share so that children and families are not isolated when they face problems with mental illness. To tell us more about that, Rebecca Hildebrand, Senior Vice President of Clarity Child Guidance Center, is here as our MC.
Thank you, Martha, and I think we have some Spanish translation that's about to happen right here.
Nada más quiero mencionar si hay alguna persona en el público que necesite escuchar la traducción de lo que se va a decir. Tenemos unos aparatos en la mesa al lado izquierdo a su disposición.
Was that not beautiful? I think you should come up here and do the rest of this. It's lovely. First of all, thank you, Martha. We're so proud to be a partner with the Health Collaborative on tonight's event. And another thank you goes to NOWCastSA, your local public TV on the internet, who will be live streaming tonight's event and also recording it for those that were unable to make it. We also want to give a big shout out. I saw her walk in earlier, Dr. Kimberly Ridgely, who's Director of Guidance and Counseling at NISD. Are you in the room, Dr. Ridgely? Raise your hand. There you are. Her and her team have been so gracious in supporting 1 in 5 Minds and advocating for the end of stigma. So, speaking of the end of stigma, I want to tell you that 1 in 5 Minds is an anti-stigma campaign. It was created by our organization, Clarity Child Guidance Center, because we saw far too families arriving for desperate care, not knowing where to go, they had no one to talk to, and they were suffering in silence. This campaign is about ending that silence, and it starts with you tonight. So we're going to start out with some table conversations. So I'm going to warn you right now, if you're at a table with just 1 or 2 people, I'm going to be asking you in a minute to join another table to make as many full tables as possible. moving. So if you're at a smaller table, I want you to think about moving right now. Once we have that table conversation, we're going to have 6 amazing breakout sessions for you to choose from to learn even more. And then we'll come back from those breakout sessions and we're going to discuss what we learned, share knowledge with each other, and then commit to taking action moving forward. And then from there, we're going to do a therapeutic exercise. Like, how many of you use a journal for your thoughts? You journal in the evening, write things down. We've got some hands up in the air. You may not realize that that's a proven way of de-stressing yourself and working through issues. So we're going to try a little exercise tonight called Tell Your Story. In between, we're going to watch some videos, really moms who are sharing their family's journey of healing. And then by the time we end tonight, we're going to be giving out some fabulous door prizes. So you want to stay for the whole event and have the chance to win those door prizes. So to get us started, let's watch one of those videos right now.
I have a 19-year-old son who has Tourette's syndrome. He's got anxiety disorder, generalized depression. When the symptoms first started, automatically denial. My husband is very traditional, so a lot of denial on his part. That's behavioral issues, don't worry about it, it'll pass. My mother-in-law believed that if you could rub an egg over them or sweep them with a broom, that this would all go away. For me to step out and to seek treatment for the children was against their norm and against their culture. I was very concerned and very worried, but kept it to myself. I felt like people would look down on us, that we had behavioral issues with our kiddos that we couldn't fix ourselves. Maybe I was doing something wrong. Maybe it was our parenting skills, because I didn't want to admit that it could be a mental illness, even though I felt like it was. People don't understand mental illness. People don't see mental illness as a form of illness, period. It makes people very uncomfortable to talk about what's going on in my family. So I tend to keep it to myself. My son doesn't have any friends. No matter how clear he is now or how well he is now, that stigma has stayed with him, because people don't see mental illness as truly as what it is. It's the same to me as somebody diagnosed with cancer or heart disease. Society doesn't view it that way, for whatever reason. It's very difficult to find your way through the system. You're pretty much left on your own. You're not well versed in the system of psychiatric care. You don't know, well, what's the next step? And then sometimes you're afraid to ask friends. Nobody talks about it. So there's no one really to relate to of what are your resources? Who have you, what do you think? If the word was out there that there are support groups, that there is help and that you can ask, parents wouldn't have to go through what we went through, which is nights of crying and nights of not sleeping and being at home with no answers and wondering if we're doing the right thing. When you start talking about mental illness, it's almost like the doors are closed. And you got to know the secret code to get in there. There is so much hope. When I got to the treatment, it was when they came in and began to talk to me about all the options and all the things they could do for him, I just sat there and cried, because it was like all my answers that I needed were here all the time, but no one showed me the way. And I was able to just sit there and tell them about, a couple of years of things that have gone on with him. I remember going home the night after I left that first day and sleeping better than I had slept in years, and knowing that I was in the right place. We had finally found that that key to unlocking that door of what we had been living with by ourselves for so long. So things at home are peaceful, but we've got a plan. We know what we're doing. It's such a relief. We live a hard life, but you learn to deal with it and you just accept it. And I just wish everybody had the education and the knowledge to know it's okay. I wish I'd have gotten help sooner, because I think a lot of those years of anxiety and crying and just our stubbornness of this can't be happening to us, and being able to step up and say, yeah, it is happening, and you know what? Our family is just as enriched and full as anybody else's, and we can get through this, but you have to have help. And we could never do this by ourselves. It's such a relief to be able to talk about it and get that feedback and that reassurance that you're not the only one. We're going to get you through this. You know, this is the way it's supposed to be. And that, you know, we know there's professional help and not old wives' tales. I really believe if we hadn't have gotten counseling for the kiddos and our family therapy and counseling, we would have been divorced. Kids that don't get treatment commit suicide, or they wind up in jail, or they're homeless, or they're on the street somewhere. If they don't go to school, they drop out of school. If we could speak freely about mental health or mental illness, kids would stay in school. Kids would get up and look for jobs and not feel like they're less than anybody else. It just gets put down to the bottom. And they're the ones that need help the most. The community needs to rally up around it, because it's just a horrible place that we're in with our kiddos.
Lisa's poignant point was the community needs to rally up around these kids. So I'm going to ask you tonight, will you rally for these kids? Will you? Will you? Each of you is here tonight for a reason. Something made you come here tonight, and you're welcome here. Whether you're here because of a child that has a mental health issue, because someone you love has a mental health issue, whether you work with kids that have a mental health issue, or perhaps you yourself have a mental health issue. We are all here to advocate for care, and that treatment brings hope. 1 in 5 children will have a mental, emotional, or behavioral disorder. That's 20%. If 20% of our community's kids had leukemia, there'd be a public outcry and that rallying of resources. But 20% of our kids have a mental illness, but we've been silent. But no longer, we can't be silent any longer, because now you know these kids need our help. And if we don't help kids when they're kids, they'll get addicted to drugs and alcohol, to self-medicate because they know there's a problem. They'll drop out of school. They'll be incarcerated, or worst of all, like Lisa said in the video, they'll end up committing suicide. And suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death in our young people. No more. We're going to change this, because even though there's hurdles like the stigma we're talking about tonight, the feeling of I can't get my child into care, I don't even know where to get care, we're going to be answering a lot of those questions for you tonight. There is hope. There is hope. There's opportunities for treatment before tragedy. So to get this started, I warned you earlier that if you were at a table that only had a few people, I wanted you to move. I want these tables to be as full as possible, because we're about to start our first table conversation. And you have a table facilitator at each table. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be answering questions around these 2 elements. Why is children's mental health important to you and your community? And what can we, as individuals, do to help the youth in our community? So those 2 questions, I want everyone to participate. So we'll get started again in a few moments. So start those table conversations.
Those of you that are watching from home live right now, or perhaps watching this as a recording, you can participate in this portion of the program as well. Right now we're having table conversations with 2 topics, but because of the nature of the questions, we're not going to actually be recording the table conversations for privacy reasons. But you too can participate. You can end the stigma right now. So if you're by yourself watching, I want you to grab a piece of paper and a pen, and I want you to think about these next 2 questions and jot them down. If you happen to be with a group of people, it's time to start the conversation about children's mental health and ending the stigma. So ask yourself, why is children's mental health important to you in the community? And what can we as individuals and a community do to make the treatment options better for kids and have better outcomes? So have those 2 questions at the ready, and you can rejoin the program momentarily.
All right, everyone, it's time to start the rest of the program. If I could get everybody's attention. Ready to tap dance? I'm really not any good You don't want me to sing? All right, well, I listened in on a few table conversations and I heard some really poignant moments happening. I heard one gentleman say, children don't even know their own self-worth. It's up to us to help them restore that dignity and respect for themselves because it's already there. We just need to restore it for them. As parents and caring community leaders, you probably still have many questions. We've kind of opened Pandora's box with these table conversations. You may be wondering if your child needs help. Maybe you know that you need help, but you're not sure what resources are available. Others may want help working with your local school, and it's a great setting to learn about working with your school. So if you look on the inside of your program, and on this screen, we've got breakout sessions. We've got 6 of them. So I'm going to walk you through them because there was one little change. You're going to have to pay attention to me. If you wanted to go to the warning signs of mental or emotional problems, that session has been moved to right here. So if that's the session that you want to participate in for the breakout session, you just stay right here. Mental health treatment options is in A263. Addiction is in A257, and working with your school is in A265. The easiest way to get to those breakout sessions is to go out this door, take a left, and look for the easels that tell you the name of your breakout session. If you're interested in working with police and juvenile system for your child, that's A209, or support groups and respite opportunities is in A210. These are also straight out this door and across the hallway. So those are your 6 breakout sessions, and Worldwide Languages is still going to be offering translation services right here in this room. So we want you to go ahead and exit the cafeteria this way and transition to your breakout session unless you're staying for mental health symptoms, which is right here. We'll see you in a few.
Everybody, are y'all about ready to start? If you want to move up, you can. If you're comfortable where you are, that's fine too. My name is Beth Confer, and I'm the Director of Community Relations at Clarity Child Guidance Center. I'm also a licensed professional counselor, and I've worked with kids for over 30 years. So my job tonight is to help you learn the warning signs when a child might have an emotional problem, when a child might need your attention. As a licensed professional counselor, and as any mental health professional knows, we tend to group things into manageable chunks of information. We group things like mood disorders. We group things like anxiety disorders, developmental disorders, and thought disorders. I could rattle off a list of warning signs that you probably wouldn't remember. So I thought what I would do is talk from my own experience. And I'm going to tell you stories of children that I've worked with, but I've changed their names and I've changed a few details of their stories, but I've kept the warning signs pretty much the same. So I'm going to tell you the stories, and then I'm going to help you figure out what the warning signs were for these children. What I want to stress is that when you look at a child who might need help, you have to consider the context of the behavior. And you have to consider their developmental milestones and where they might be. So it's perfectly normal for a 2-year-old to throw himself on the floor, kick and scream, and have a temper tantrum. But it's not perfectly normal for a 17-year-old child to do that. So when you're thinking about these warning signs, consider context or the behavior within the circumstances, and consider the child's development. Okay, the first story that I want to tell you is about Jennifer. Jennifer was a beautiful young girl who came to me when I worked at a mental health facility, not Clarity, it was a different one. She's 15 years old. Jennifer lived with her mom and with her stepfather and with 3 younger siblings. She came to me at the end of a very tragic story. But when she was at home, she started having difficulty in school. This is one warning sign. She started really struggling with focus and attention. Her grades dropped as a result. She started having crying spells, unexplained crying spells. She started to isolate. She didn't hang out with her friends as much as she used to. And when her mother would try to talk to her, she would overreact. So she would become, instead of a little bit upset, she would become almost hysterical, or she would scream at her mother. Very unusual behaviors for this child. Eventually, Jennifer's behaviors became so severe that she came to the attention of the school counselor. The school counselor developed a relationship with her, and after a while, she noticed that Jennifer was dressing in ways that weren't appropriate for the temperature. For example, today it was, I think, 103 outside. Even when it was hot, Jennifer would wear long sleeves. So eventually, she got Jennifer to roll up her sleeves, and she saw that Jennifer had been cutting on her wrist. I want to differentiate bad coping skills from someone who is truly suicidal. Early on in this story, Jennifer was cutting on herself in a very maladaptive coping skill. She didn't want to die, but for some reason, when you're put in a situation over which you have no control, when you start cutting on yourself, you actually have some measure of control, and I'll explain this a little bit more later. So originally, Jennifer didn't want to die, but things became so bad that when the counselor did start talking to her, Jennifer confided into that counselor that her stepfather had been raping her for several years. When Jennifer came to me, she had been evaluated by a mental health professional, and she was admitted to the unit that I worked on. Jennifer made an outcry to me. She hadn't told anyone else that her stepfather had been raping her. I, of course, had to call CPS. You can imagine what happened. We had a family therapy session, and during this family therapy session, Jennifer told her mom that her stepfather had been sneaking into her room after her mom went to bed. The mother chose not to believe Jennifer. So when I called CPS, all of the children, Jennifer and her 3 siblings, were taken out of the household, including a newborn child that mom had just had. I do not know what happened to that child, but there were warning signs a long time before Jennifer ever got to me. And those warning signs were difficulty concentrating in school, drop in grades. She was isolative. She became much more of a loner. She didn't hang out with her friends anymore. She was emotionally overreactive, and eventually she started to hurt herself. Now, not everyone, like I said, who hurts themselves is suicidal. Not everyone who's suicidal starts out hurting themselves a little bit at a time like she did. So it's very important to get kids who self-injure into a mental health professional. I want to talk about another child that I worked with, and his name was David. He was one of the cutest little boys I'd ever seen. He's 10 years old, and he lived sometimes with mom, sometimes with dad. His parents were divorced. They had the most contentious divorce that I've ever seen. And the custody battle for this 10-year-old little boy was fierce. Both parents used him against the other. And when he went to stay at Dad's house, Mom would then question him about everything that happened at Dad's house. And when he went to stay at Mom's house, Dad would then question him about everything that happened at Mom's house. So David began to cry with little or no provocation. He became excessively anxious about hurting other people's feelings. He frequently complained of physical aches and pains like a headache or an upset stomach. He had trouble sleeping, and when I asked him about this, he said he couldn't turn off his brain so that he could sleep. He complained to his teachers that kids were picking on him, but then when he complained to those teachers, he became terrified that the teachers were angry at him for complaining about the other kids' behaviors. Eventually, he became so overwhelmed and he became so anxious that he threatened to kill himself, and he was eventually admitted to a psychiatric facility for which I worked at the time. So in David's case, the warning signs were pretty obvious. He was anxious and he worried a lot more than other kids his age. He was extremely fearful. He was unable to sit still or pay attention. He was always worried that something bad was going to happen. He had racing thoughts that of course made it difficult to sleep. When we did a group therapy session with this little boy, we asked him to draw a picture of a place where he felt safe. And what he drew was a vast ocean full of sharks and really big, scary creatures. And then he drew this tiny little stick figure at the bottom of the page. And when we asked him about that, he said, "That's me." And we asked, "Why are you at the bottom of the ocean?" And David said, "Because that's where I can go and I don't have to hear anybody." This child was being used as an instrument against his parents by each other. So last I knew of that little boy, the battle was still ongoing. So we're talking about a child who's excessively anxious out of proportion to what was going on. The racing thoughts, the inability to sleep, the inability to pay attention. So those two stories that I've just told you were very situational. Jennifer and David might have been different kids if they'd been in different households. But not every child who has a problem is reacting to circumstances within their home. I have another story to tell you, and this story is of Mary. Mary was a 15-year-old girl. She did very, very well in high school. She made A's and she made B's, and she participated in her school's track program. She had a group of friends that she'd been hanging out with since she was in elementary school, so they had long-established friendships. But over a certain amount of time, Mary's grades began to drop. And at one point, this great AB honor roll student actually failed a math class, first time ever in her educational history. And as a result, she had to drop out of track, which was the only thing that kind of made her feel good. And her mom knew this when she asked Mary about it, and she said, "That's okay, because I wasn't very good at track anyway." So she started pulling away from her friends. She started isolating in her room. Eventually, she just started to sleep most of the weekend. She wouldn't participate in any of the family outings with her siblings or her mom. She used to love to go to the movies. She loved to go out to restaurants. She stopped doing all of that. And when her mom asked her if she wanted to go, she said no, that she really didn't want to. Eventually, Mary's mom got her in to see a therapist. And this therapist did an awesome job of connecting with Mary. She established a really good trust relationship with Mary. And Mary finally told her that sometimes she felt so worthless. She feared that things would never get better. She even said that sometimes she wished she was dead, because she said she was tired of being a burden on her family. So this therapist knew enough to get Mary in with a psychiatrist who got her on an antidepressant medication. And thank God, that medication was extremely effective for this particular child. She said the combination of therapy and medication over several weeks made her feel like her old self again. But in this particular situation, Mary's depression wasn't situational. There was really no reason for it. It's just like a switch flipped in her head. So looking back over Mary's story, did y'all see anything, or did you notice anything that was a trouble sign? Think about what happened in school. Grades fell. She failed a class for the first time ever. She had to drop out of track, one thing that she really loved. She stopped hanging out with her friends. She stopped doing all the things that she used to love doing. And she started sleeping much, much more than what she usually did. So we're talking about isolating from friends, lack of interest in what she used to do, change in sleep habits, and that can go one way or the other. In Mary's case, she slept a lot. Teenagers do sleep a lot, but she slept an excessive amount. And sometimes, like in the case with David, he could barely sleep at all. So any change in sleep habits needs to be noted. She also reported feeling worthless and hopeless about the future. And then finally, Mary said that she wished she was dead. So in Mary's case, she had depression. Thank God it was simple enough that they could address it with therapy and medication. I have one more story to tell you, and then I want to talk a little bit more about warning signs. I had a young man, a brilliant young man. He was 16 years old and extraordinarily musically talented. This boy wrote songs that you probably have heard. He was smart. He did very well in school. He was engaging. And when he came to me on the psychiatric unit where I worked, he sounded just like I sound. He sounded perfectly normal. Didn't seem like there was anything wrong with him. And as I was interviewing him, he said, yes, that his mind raced a lot. Yes, it was difficult to sleep, but that's okay, because he's a teenager. He was involved in music. He had a lot of things to do with school, and that was all normal. And I thought, yeah, that probably sounds right. But when I was talking to him, we had windows very similar to these windows here. And even though he was talking in a perfectly normal tone of voice, even though everything he said made perfect sense, he finally told me, Beth, it's been good talking to you, but we can't talk anymore. And I said, well, okay, why is that? And he said, because the CIA is watching me through those windows. And there's C4 explosives in the ice maker. So we have to get out of this room. So here's this beautiful young man, extraordinarily talented, gifted, smart kid, and he had what looked like a thought disorder. That became very evident when he started talking about strange things. So what I want to say is we had a brochure on the Clarity table, and I'm going to just show this to you briefly. You're welcome to come get them. We have all sorts of warning signs in here. But I think it's important to note that children don't always talk like you and I would. If they're very, very little, a child's not going to say, Mommy, I'm really, really scared, or Mommy, I'm really, really angry. If it's a very, very little child, they may not know how to label those emotions. So sometimes you have to help. Sometimes you have to be kind of a detective and know, how do you know when this kid is going to need help? You have to look for the signs that this child is exhibiting with his behavior, not his words. So is this child complaining of physical aches and pains? Is this child excessively worried about things that ordinarily they wouldn't? Are they exceptionally clingy to mom or to dad? So as little ones might manifest in that type of behavior, teenagers are a whole different ballgame. Teenagers can be isolative and withdrawn, but teenagers can also be very angry and defiant. And when I was on the unit, my favorite kids were the kids who were bigger and badder than all the other kids. They had numerous intimidating tattoos. They had just about everything you could pierced. And they had fierce t-shirts. I don't know if y'all remember Insane Clown Posse, but that was like a big t-shirt. They were very intimidating looking masks. And what I realized is that those kids were frequently the most hurt, sad children that I had on the unit, because it is so easy to scare people away when you look intimidating before you ever let them get close enough to hurt you. So look at the way kids are dressed. Look at the way they act. Don't listen just to what they're saying. So when it comes to deciphering a child or a teen's behavior, you do have to become a detective. So we've covered just a few of the signs, but not all. I would really encourage you to go to the Clarity table, exhibit table, pick up one of those blue brochures. Google things like, is my kid's behavior normal? If your child's behavior changes in any way, in a great drastic way, very suddenly, something may have occurred. Or if their behaviors change gradually, they stopped hanging out with their best friends that they knew since second grade. Find out what's going on with those kids, because as much as we are programmed as parents to take care of our children are actually kind of programmed to take care of us. So there have been many, many children that I've worked with who said, I'm only going to tell you this. I'm not going to tell my mom because I'm afraid it's going to hurt her feelings. I'm not going to tell my dad that when he shows up at my soccer games drunk, I get embarrassed because my dad might get really drunk and take it out on me. So if you have children who are exhibiting any behaviors you're worried about, get them to a mental health professional, because they're much more likely to confide in someone they don't feel like they're going to hurt their feelings with if they tell them the truth. Are there any questions about anything that I said? Okay. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for asking. She asked which table is the Clarity table. It's this one over to my left. Are there any other questions? Yes, sir.
What percentage of children are actually successful in terms of suicide attempts?
Well, as Rebecca said, it's the third leading cause of death. So I don't know the statistics, but if you look at causes of death, and it's number 3. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you so much for your attention. I appreciate that.
We're going to go ahead and get the rest of the program started. So by now, you had a table conversation, visited a breakout session. I stayed in the one that was around mental health symptoms and heard very rich conversation about the symptoms and signs, things to look out for. So now we want to take you down a journey of another mom sharing her story of hope and healing. So everyone, please meet Elba.
My daughter, she was having problems getting along with her peers, and we started seeing some behaviors that we thought she was acting out. Maybe it's hormonal, maybe it's things going on at school, but in the pit of my stomach, I thought, this is something more. The teachers and the counselors, they had already made their decision about her, that she was a problem child, that she was rebellious, that she did not want to listen to the rules. Then it escalated into cutting and self-harm and trying to actively commit suicide and overdose on pills or run away because she didn't want to be at the house. And she just didn't think that there was a reason for her to get up. She had no hope. You're so overwhelmed with just containing the situation. You're so overwhelmed with just keeping your child safe. We knew we needed help. We knew we needed help. The amount of people in San Antonio that need mental health services and the amount of doctors that are out there able to provide those services, therapists included, it doesn't equal, it doesn't match up. It's out of whack. The ease of access to mental health services comes down to where are the beds and where the availability of the beds. It really comes down to, is there room for my child today? How could you look at your child and not be heartbroken to just say, I can't help you because I don't have insurance. I can't get you what you need because we don't have the money. I couldn't do that. Children sit there and they suffer, and they're suffering in silence. And that suffering leads to running away. Their suffering leads to self-harm. Their suffering leads to trying to overdose. Some of them are successful. One of the little girls that my daughter met ended up committing suicide. And it was so heartbreaking. Because she said, Mom, that was my friend. And
I look at the time that I have with my children, and I think of every day as a gift. Every day is a gift, no matter what we're struggling with that day.
If she hadn't received the help that she received when she received the help at that critical time, I don't know if we would have been able to celebrate her birthday this year. I still have the birthday decorations up in my house. And she said, "Mom, when are you going to take these down?" And I said, "I have them up because I didn't know last year if we were going to make it to this point. I didn't. There were times where I was hopeless." I said, You've done so good. You've gone a whole year. You haven't cut. You haven't tried to overdose. You haven't run away. You're back on track with school. You've come so far. You've come so far." And she gave me a hug and she goes, "Mom, we came so far." And then we just started crying. And she goes, "Now you're going to take the decorations down?"
Should those blinds not be closed? Let's focus on the spiritual grace of light shining on her face during that entire video. Elba is focused on her daughter's birthday, and I saw her a couple weeks ago, and I want you to know she and her daughter celebrated yet another one. So let's give a round of applause for every birthday that our children deserve. So it's now time for another table conversation. So if you're at a table with just a few people, I'm going to ask that you move to a table with more people for the richer conversation. And your facilitators are going to help with this process. So move to a table with a facilitator and with a group. And there's 2 questions we're going to ask of you. We want to know, what breakout session did you attend? What did you learn from that? We want you to share that with your table mates. And then tell us what action you're going to be taking after hearing this information. So what have you learned, something new? And then what action are you going to take? And we'll get started with the rest of the program in just a moment. So start those table conversations.
Those of you at home right now watching the live stream, or perhaps watching this as a recording, have an opportunity to participate in this moment in the program as well. We're having table conversations, and because private information might be shared, we're not going to actually tape that portion of it. But that doesn't mean you've been left out. So if you're there alone, I want you to grab a piece of paper and a pen, because I'm going to ask you 2 questions, and I want you to jot down some of those answers. If you're with a group of people, start the conversation. That's the best way for us to end the stigma. So if you've been watching this live stream, you saw Beth Comfer share multiple stories of children that she's worked with, and then related that to the signs and symptoms. So as she shared that, I want you to think about one new thing you learned today from today's program. So write down or share that one new thing you've learned today, and then what action are you personally going to take to help end the stigma? So share now. Thank you.
All right, so what I want to do right now is I want to thank the exhibitors that are here today, and I also want to tell you about something special that is available for you tonight. The Center for Healthcare Services is here as an exhibitor, the Children's Bereavement Center, Clarity Child Guidance Center, Laurel Ridge Treatment Center, National Alliance for Mental Illness, SAPD's Mental Health Unit, right over there, Texas Federation of Families for Children's Mental Health, the Health Collaborative, and Worldwide Languages. But I'd like to point out something to you that's special to y'all tonight. There's a very important program that has been launched in San Antonio, and they have availability right now. And it's being headed up by Dr. Stacy Ryan, and she happens to be sitting at the National Alliance for Mental Illness table. She's raising her hand right over here. And so what I want to tell you is, it's an adolescent substance abuse treatment program. Let me tell you right now, one of the biggest problems in our community is there's not enough resources for substance abuse treatment. So if you have a concern about an adolescent, whether it's your child or someone else's child or someone in your classroom, whatever it might be, I want you to go visit Stacy. She's going to raise her hand again right over here and talk to her. She's got program availability. And it's something called a district project, so it's likely to have almost no cost. So you really, really want to visit that table to learn more from Dr. Stacy Ryan. So with that said, earlier I asked you to raise your hand if you do any kind of journaling, if you write down your thoughts or if you keep a little diary. And I told you that that is a very proven therapeutic approach to de-stressing and working out issues. Well, we're going to try that together. At your table, you have a sheet of paper, looks like this, and you should have a pen. Now, if you're missing this sheet of paper that says, how has mental illness in children touched you personally? This is an exercise we call Tell Your Story. So we want you to find that sheet of paper. If you happen to be missing it, we've got plenty, and our volunteers in the back will help you. So you just have to raise your hand. If you're missing that sheet of paper, raise your hand and keep it up. Our volunteers will bring it to you. Some of you are helping others to find your sheet of paper. That's great. So what we want you to do is we want you to use this form to really write about personal experience. It could be one of your own. It could be, in loving a child, someone else's child, a child that's in your classroom, or your Sunday school class, or your neighbor's child. We really want you to open up and share this story. Now you can do a couple different things with it when you're done. You can take it as a memento, something to kind of reflect upon what you learned today and how you're sharing. Or you can leave it on your table and check boxes to allow us to share that message anonymously on our 1 in 5 Minds site. I have to tell you that when you share those messages, it's critically important because people read them and it brings peace and solace. So you can either take the form with you, or you can fill it out and turn it, actually just leave it on the table, we'll collect it. So with that, get ready to tell your story.
Those of you watching this live stream, or perhaps as a recording, you can participate and tell your story as well. What we'd like you to do is go to our website, 1in5minds.org. That's numeral 1, in, numeral 5, minds.org. And from there, you can find the resources for Tell Your Story. You can read about other people's stories, watch videos, and contribute your own story online to help others and bring solace and peace to all. Thank you.
All right, everyone. We're beginning the final phase of tonight's program. Tonight, you took an important step. What I saw tonight were open hearts, open minds, people willing to be vulnerable with one another, have important conversations, share what they learned. I went to one table who had gone to the SAPD breakout session, and they'd gotten a crisis intervention training manual. And she said, go over there, everybody, you go to their session, go to their table and try to get the manual. I saw another young lady who went to the respite and support groups breakout session, and she brought back flyers for her whole table. That is amazing. Y'all are all sharing with each other and helping to increase knowledge. So many of you are already advocates of the 1 in 5 Minds campaign. So when I talk about it, it's familiar to you. But if you're not familiar with 1in5minds.org, I want you to visit the website. There are flyers, there's information, there's videos, there's all kinds of resources available for you. There's even, I can change my Facebook profile picture from the picture of me 15 years ago, 20 pounds thinner, to a 1 in 5 Minds photos. And I can share that information on Facebook to say, I'm an advocate, come talk to me. So there's all kinds of resources there. So those of you that are not already advocates, we want your permission to go ahead and sign you up to be an advocate, and we'll be sending you information about that. Now, learning is a lifetime endeavor, and we're really grateful for your time and attention tonight. What I'd like to do is bring back our amazing Martha from the Health Collaborative to close out the evening and award those fun prizes. So thank you all for attending tonight, and Martha.